This is a Dauntless Media Collective podcast. Visit dauntless.fm for more content.
Checking my email. Checking my email. Diggity dear, Strong Bat.
Strong Bat is here. For those who are in their 20s in the early 2000s, you'll catch that reference.
Yeah. If you don't get it, it's okay.
It wasn't That's fine. It's fine. But speaking of emails, we love getting your emails at Full Mutuality. It is such an encouragement to us to read through it. I know we said that on our last episode. And we were encouraged. How do people send us an email if they want to, Nate?
Yeah. So if you want to send us an email, head over to fullmutuality.com and click the contact button at the top of the screen. And yeah, drop us a line. We love hearing from our listeners.
We do. And speaking of, I wanted to read this email because it was just a lot of fun to read. And it's why we do what we do here at the podcast. So yeah, I'm going to just read through this. I read Pure this past summer and it was the final straw for me. By the way, Nate, have you read Pure?
I haven't read Pure. I have, however, heard quite a few interviews from Linda K. Klein, but I have yet to read her book. It is on my TBR list, but my TBR list is very, very long. Same. She's on my list of books I have heard so much about and want to read and just haven't gotten around to. But I've heard her speak, and actually I have a funny story. I heard her speak live once. But before I heard her speak, I actually went out to lunch with her, and I did not know who she was. We're just a bunch of random people at the conference going out to eat together, and we're sitting around a table. And I do remember she had fabulous heels on that day. I have to make note of that. Or like she was walking with, and it has something to do with my story. But anyway, as we're sitting and eating and I don't know her, I'm just chatting with her, making small talk. And I start getting into conversation and she starts pulling out her notebook and writing down notes as I'm speaking. And I'm just like, what's going on here? Like I didn't know who she was. I didn't know she was an author. None of that. Just having some random conversation and some girls writing down. She's like, is it okay if I write this down? I'm like, sure. And in my head, I'm just like, this is really weird. And then later she ran off and someone's like, oh yeah, she's this conference speaker. That's why she took off and she forgot her cell phone. So then I had to go bring her cell phone. Anyway, that was my Linda K. Klein story. That was a lot of fun. It's like, oh, that's why she was taking down notes as I spoke. Okay, sorry, getting back to this. We'll probably make a little side commentary because this was a fun email to read through. So that was the final straw, reading Linda's book. Looking back, I've been deconstructing for several years, but I'd been too afraid to put a name to it. Yeah, for a while there was no name for deconstruction. People just did it. She said, I joined a deconstruction group, and after I mentioned being homeschooled with Bob Jones' curriculum my whole life, you might know something about that, Nate. I mean, not that you were homeschooled, but you went to Bob Jones. No, but I had Bob Jones curriculum my whole life.
You did? Your high school, right? Had Bob Jones curriculum?
Yeah, from elementary. Like I started, when I was in kindergarten, we had Bob Jones curriculum. And
that's how the feeder schools work, right? They got the BJU from the start. They're pretty popular, I believe, in homeschool curriculum.
Yeah.
So someone recommended your podcast. I started in late October and proceeded to binge listen to all the episodes in just a few weeks. It's been so validating and literally life-changing to listen to. Thank you so much. By the way, those are the comments that I just pause on and I'm like, come on. Nate and I just sit, we talk, we share our thoughts. And to know that it's helping you as you're going through this, if you're feeling like you're alone out there, we're touched. Thank you for letting us know that it's doing that for you. She continues, for the last several weeks, I've been worried because both you and Janice hadn't updated since a similar time. And with some of the topics you discussed, it was really hoping there wasn't any legal issues going on. We mentioned Hillsong last time with the gag order stuff. And so I was so relieved when I saw your update today, and even more relieved when I heard that it was so you both had a break, which is so important and healthy and so hard to do, even life-giving. It's so hard to do even living post-evangelical lives. Seriously, thank you for what you do. Thank you for what you discuss. And thank you for allowing yourselves the grace to ask questions and then extending that grace to others. Thank you, Renee.
Thank you, Renee. That was such a kind email from them.
Yeah.
We don't expect kind emails.
We don't know.
If you want to send us hate email, you could do that too.
Yeah. I don't know if we're gonna read it. Maybe we will read some hate mail one day.
But I mean, if it's particularly interesting, maybe.
There's something I'm like, we should make a T-shirt with the stuff we get. We should have Full Mutuality merch with our hate stuff. But we love the kind emails. It helps us, reminds us of why we do what we do. Speaking of Janice and how she's been off for a while, I'm sure most of you guys are missing listening to her, missing hearing her voice. I know that I love following her podcast, God Is Not Given, and I miss it when I don't hear her, and she has been off for a while. But if you're like me and you like hearing Janice, go check out her Instagram account because she's still
very active.
She posts up hilarious, informative. If you're ex-evangelical, if you're deconstructing and you need a place that's therapeutic, her stuff is just, it's so funny. It's the comedic relief that we all need at a time like this. Mm-hmm. So head on over there and follow her there. Yeah. But I'm excited today.
Yeah, because like you said, if you miss Janice, you can always check out her Instagram. But also, you can listen to our podcast.
You can, because for the next 3 podcasts that we will be releasing, you're going to get to hear us having a conversation with Janice. We recorded this actually quite a while back. Mm-hmm. And we were going to put it all as one episode, actually. And she was the one who was like, you know what? I think you should break it up. Because the topic that we're going to be talking about in this episode, we're going to give you the introduction, actually. This first episode today will be the intro to the next ones that are going to follow. And we're going to be covering like we always do, evangelicalism.
Like we always do.
Like we always do, or we often do. Sometimes we don't, but we cover it because we came out of it. And we're going to be breaking down today, is evangelicalism a cult? And we're going to sort of give our intro to what that means. Mm-hmm. Our starting point.
So I guess that's about it, right?
That's it.
You got anything else? I don't have anything else.
Nope.
All right.
Without any further ado, I think we could just lead right into this.
This is not an argument I would have ever had any need to have. Like, first of all, if you're close enough to me to be having the serious conversation, you're probably in the cult too, so we're not talking about it. And if you're coming at me from the outside, you're outside of it. You don't get it. You don't get it. And I think also you're just so busy doing everything else. Like you're just so worried about, again, the afterlife, right? And the spiritual battles, and like every little thing has so much significance. You're just so focused on so much other stuff. You can't even stop to think about just the basics of where did this book come from? Who put this together? Like you just don't. God did it, and here it is, and no further questions. Right? No notes, no questions.
Hi, I'm Nate.
I'm Gail.
And this is Full Mutuality. On today's podcast, we have our very first repeat guest, Janice Lagata.
Yay!
Welcome back.
Woo-hoo! Thanks for having me back. This is my first time returning to this podcast, so...
Well, after today, we'll make a decision as to whether we want you back again.
Such a goofball.
Oh, pressure is on.
Yep. See if we go out for coffee and lunch and everything again after this.
I'm like, guys? What happened? Guys? No? Okay. No.
So the topic of today's conversation is going to be a fun one. So we're going to kind of walk through it. We know that it might be a bit, probably a bit polarizing, and might turn some listeners off right off the get-go. So you probably even looked at the title of the episode and were like, yeah, no, that's not for me. But if you do happen to listen, stick around. I think it might be worth hearing us out. So...
is evangelical Christianity a cult?
Is it? We're going to answer the question. It's a big question.
That's our top. You know what? I think before we get into it, probably we should do should we do defining of terms? What is evangelical? Who is an evangelical?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because that can get a little messy, right? Like I remember...
Because it's not a denomination per se. But there are a common set of beliefs that span. Like, if you are evangelical, you can probably pick out what another evangelical church is, even if they have differences from your denomination. Be like, oh, that's evangelical.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, because you often hear, is it a denomination? No, obviously it's not. But I think, well, maybe we could talk about some of the things that we might recognize as evangelical, like maybe some key phrases and whatnot. Do you guys have anything? I have some thoughts.
Go ahead. Give us your thoughts, Nate.
Okay.
What are your
Okay.
key? How do you know someone's? What are they going to say to you? And you're like, oh, that's an evangelical.
Well, often they'll ask, "Are you a born again Christian?" So if you could,
Are
they
you
could say,
saved?
yeah.
Does
are you
anyone say
saved?
that if they're not evangelical? Are you
Do
saved?
you know the Lord?
Do you know the Lord?
Have you accepted the Lord and
Have you
Savior into your
accepted
heart?
Jesus
Have you-
Christ as your personal Lord and Savior?
Personal Lord and
Personal
Savior.
Lord and Savior. Yeah.
Have
Because
you
no
prayed,
other.
prayed the prayer?
Oh yeah, prayed the prayer.
Like
Yeah.
I don't know that's so. Like the proselytizing is a big piece of that, right? Like the
Mhm.
need to convert people because you have to say the prayer, you have to accept Jesus in your heart as your Lord and Savior. It's like there's a moment in time, then you accept Jesus and you're saved. And the saved thing is huge. And the saved thing is what it's all about, right?
What
Like
it's all
that's
about.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, just the word, right? Evangelicalism, like
Yeah.
evangel, like you are going out, you are evangelizing. Like I think that is, are you trying to make converts? Is that part of the mission? Like,
Yeah.
is that what this is based on? Then
Yep.
it's evangelical.
Yeah. What are some other things?
that set them apart that from
yeah.
other groups that are Christian?
DC Talk.
Why do you have to call me out like that, Nate? You're so mean. That was like my favorite band back in the day, and it's a little embarrassing. They had like their biggest hit. For those who aren't evangelical who are like in curiosity listening to this, their biggest hit song was called Jesus Freak. Like, I mean,
Yep.
it doesn't get any more evangelical. I was
What will
so
people say?
evangelical.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
What will people say when they
What will
hear
people
that
say?
I'm a Jesus freak? What will people do when they find
When
that
they
it's
find out
true?
it's
Okay,
true.
I don't want
Yeah.
to start singing this whole song and I'm stuck in my head.
It's already stuck.
Oh, switch to the Nirvana version because they have like a
Oh yeah,
rip-off
because it
of
was a rip-off of Nirvana.
right.
It sounds, if you play "Smells Like Teen Spirit,"
It's
right up next to "Jesus Freak."
Yeah, it's the same chord
Yeah.
progression and everything.
Yep.
Like a good Christian band ripping off secular music, right? Evangelical. Oh man, evangelicalism has their own whole music industry, like CCM, all the Tooth and Nail. Like they're all the record labels where it's like they're Christian music. They're separate. You know, and it's a whole world. They got their own movies. Evangelicalism has its own movie
Oh
industry.
yeah.
Weird Christian movies. Okay, wait.
Yeah.
We can go off topic. What do you find is the worst weird Christian movies that you've seen? Like that where you're just like
I didn't
All of them,
watch.
like, how can
Yeah,
you-
they're
all
all
of them?
They're all terrible.
Pick a bad one.
So
you're like all bad.
I didn't watch, other than like the end times, like rapture based movies. I didn't watch a whole lot of Christian movies.
Did you see all the Rapture ones, like Kirk Cameron, Left Behind, the original Thief in the Night with the like ticking
Yep,
at
I
the
saw
beginning?
the original Thief in the Night series. We did like I remember we did a lock-in at my church youth group growing up, and we watched I think all of the Thief in the Night movies back to back. Then of course the Kirk Cameron Left Behind movies.
You know what? We're actually getting into something pretty evangelical. I would say the apocalyptic kind of end times. Like they may not, the evangelical churches might not all agree on what that looks like and how the order of things, but they're all big on to like, it's not just get saved and it's about the afterlife. It's like about this apocalyptical coming that's happening and the world is kind of degrading into this terrible time that's going to come. And we got to get out of here and go be with Jesus because it's all going to go bad.
Yeah.
Was your growing up, Janice? Did you watch those movies? Were they big into the end time stuff?
Yeah, like I'm sure I've seen it. I don't remember.
You blocked it out.
I probably blocked it out. Also, because I was like really fearful
Okay.
anyway, and so like I do not like anything horror, anything.
I don't watch horror movies. I'm with you.
Nothing gory, like nothing, none of that, and so something like that would be terrifying. So as a child, you forget the memory, but like you just keep the fear. So
Yeah.
like I had rapture anxiety, right?
Rapture anxiety is a common
You
one.
know,
That is
needing to know where people are and if everyone's
right.
stepped out for some reason, and I don't know, just like always checking. Okay, if my grandma's still here, we're still here.
We're good.
Yeah.
You have like your
good.
one
Yep.
that you're sure God is not going to leave behind. So if they're there, you're what, Nate? You're like smiling.
Oh.
You too?
I had almost every day.
Wow.
I mean, because I grew up in a tradition. So, I mean, we could talk about like our traditions too, because we do have
That ties into
evangelicalism as kind of like a common denominator for us, but we all come from different branches.
parts.
Yeah.
Right. We're not,
So,
we
like-
didn't all go to the same kind of church growing
Right.
up, but yet we're all still evangelical.
Yeah. So like for me, I come from the what evangelicalism was based on was the fundamentalist tradition. Like if it weren't for us, evangelicalism wouldn't exist. But evangelicalism exists.
Thanks, Nate.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Good job, guys.
But it exists because it reacted to fundamentalism. It basically was like we want to believe what fundamentalists believe without the weird separatist kind of what they called cultish behavior. So then you had the Billy Graham crusades that kind of branched off and did something different. But anyway, so I come from the fundamentalist background, all the same beliefs, and we consumed some of the same media too. And that's where my rapture anxiety came from. We had a traveling preacher who came with the charts, the end timeline charts with like when the rapture happens, that triggers this thing, and there's like, the 7 trumpets and the 7 bowls of God's wrath, and like those that happen at different points after the 7-year tribulation, the midpoint of the tribulation, when the Antichrist is supposed to appear, when the beast is supposed to appear, when the Battle of Armageddon is supposed to take place, and then the millennial period after,
I remember that. My church, which was not fundamentalist, was Pentecostal, Italian Pentecostal. I remember the charts. I remember the timelines. When I switched to an open brethren church, funny enough, so I spent my whole childhood from 7 to like 16 or 17 in my Italian Pentecostal church. And then I went into an open brethren church, and it was like, like more of a Calvinist reformed kind of vibe going on. And in that church, they avoided, like they'd do a preach through the whole Bible, and they would always avoid preaching on Revelations because it was too controversial. People had different opinions on the chart and how it was supposed to go. Are you premillennial or postmillennial? Or they had but like people get so passionate and worked up over this that they would just skip Revelations just because they didn't want to get too deep into that. They didn't let's focus on what we have in common in Jesus, and that's the main thing. And then some people were worked up about the fact you skipped a whole part of the Bible, like how. But it's just interesting because if you read through Revelation, the whole Sorry, I know we're side tangenting because we're gonna get back to evangelicalism and if it's a cult, but maybe this is interesting for people who are like, what is this weird? I'm not evangelical, and what is this? The belief in the rapture, which seems to be such a big piece to evangelical thought, was invented in 18-something by Wakefield. I don't know. If there's somebody who was a preacher it was recent. It's a modern, before that, there was no teachings on the rapture. This is a modern invention. And it's so critical and crucial to how we think through things. All the video series and TV series and book series on Left Behind and the end times to something that's it's kind of like evangelicalism. In the history of Christianity, evangelicalism is the baby brother. It's the kid, it's the snot-nosed teen brother that thinks they know everything, but they're they're the newcomer to the table in discussion, but they have all these answers on how everything's supposed to be done. So Nate's probably fact-checking me on who it was that. Did you find out who was the person? I could see it on his face.
Yeah, I found a Wikipedia article about rapture eschatology, but it's not very clear.
I'll do some Googling. I'll come back with that.
Where some of these views, some of it was expressed by 17th century American Puritans, Cotton Mather. So, it is a relatively new thing. It's not
well, especially
exclusive.
Even if there was conversations about it, it wasn't in the way we see it.
It's not biblical.
That's where I was going with it. You're bringing me back, Janice. My point is there were other ways Revelation was read through that was not about this. This was not the topic. This is not how it was written. That's not what it was supposed to be. The people discussing this were finding cryptic ways to discuss what was going on in their world.
What was going on right then?
Yeah, right there.
It was.
And evangelicals were like, let's make this some cool apocalyptical.
And let's make it about us, because everything is about us.
Exactly.
Oh, man.
If the white Christian is not at the center of the story, then what's even the point?
Right.
What is it? What is evangelicalism without? And I know that most of our, I mean, I do want to make the distinction. There is a difference between white evangelicalism and black evangelicalism. They're not identical. And we tend to use evangelical as an umbrella term. And usually we're talking about white evangelicalism, which is not cool. So like I try and make a point to say white evangelicalism, because it's like how men get all the default labels, like, you know, National Basketball League, and then we go to women. It's like women's basketball. Why are men default humanity and we get to be like women? I don't want to do that with a black and white thing, but I come out of white evangelicalism. I know you do, Nate. Janice, you didn't grow up in white evangelicalism, did you?
I mean,
influenced by.
It's a difficult conversation because, yes, I grew up with a black pastor. However, like if you just go one generation back, so if you're looking at like who were the people coming to speak to our church, who were like the spiritual forefathers or whatever, and it's Kenneth Hagin and it's Kenneth Copeland, and so it's all these white people. And so it's, there's black people in here and black people leading it, but this is still white evangelicalism.
Yeah.
Like I was having a conversation with a friend of mine a couple of weeks ago and talking about Pentecostalism and just all the spiritual warfare on everything, right? And just like, why did we as black people, why are we fighting Native American spirits and fighting like black spirits, right? And we're calling out and calling down kind of all this stuff that is denigrating our backgrounds and basically saying, oh, we've got all this spiritual bondage and, bondage from all of this dark magic kind of stuff, right? But like, why does not Pentecostalism, why is it never against the spirits of slavery or the spirits of violence? Like white people, right. Like
white demons, come on.
Right. Like all of these kind of spiritual issues. So so I think that's the difference. There is a black evangelicalism that is very much about justice and about liberty and about, liberation and that kind of stuff. That's not the church I grew up in. So it was
influenced by white evangelicalism.
Black on, so I would say it was white evangelicalism just being practiced by people of color, which is, that's the American story. The same way I can have white supremacist tendencies. Like, it doesn't,
Mm-hmm.
The Chapel Probation Podcast takes a critical look at evangelical colleges and universities, focusing initially on Azusa Pacific University, where I taught English for 15 years. I'm Scott Okamoto, and I'm writing a book about how I deconstructed from faith completely while at APU. This podcast, though, is my tribute to the students and other faculty who survived evangelical higher education. They faced ridiculous racism, sexism, anti-LGBTQ hatred, and all manner of bigotry. From the heartless evils of the prosperity gospel to the destructive pseudo-theology of purity culture, the stories will break your heart, but they will also inspire. These people faced bigotry and fought back. In a weird, kind of sick way, we went through some shit, but we formed identities and we formed communities through it all. I hope you will join us.
Hey everyone, I'm Nate from the Full Mutuality Podcast. I wanted to take a moment to say thank you for tuning into this show. We're so grateful that you've decided to spend your time with us. Seriously, Dan, Gail, Jessica, Kathleen, Scott, and the rest of us here at the Dauntless Media Collective couldn't produce content like the show you're listening to without your support. I'd also like to invite you even further into the conversation. Right now, there are some great discussions happening over in the Dauntless Media Collective Discord server. If you're interested in chatting with other folks who are deconstructing and decolonizing the oppressive traditions that they came from, please feel free to hop on into the server. If you don't know what Discord is, it's a place where communities can gather online for chatting on a wide variety of topics. In our Discord server, we have channels devoted to general deconstruction conversations, some meme sharing, therapeutic venting about whatever religious bullshit you're currently dealing with, and even a channel specifically devoted to talking about the latest episodes of the podcast you're listening to right now. I hope you'll join us. You can log in directly to the Dauntless server by clicking the link in the show notes, or heading to dauntless.fm and clicking the link in the top banner. See you there. I think another marker of evangelicalism is the way that they approach the Bible. So, I mean, like all of us come from different evangelical traditions. Again,
you said phrases in a Bible believing.
Oh,
Do you
yeah,
go
Bible
to a Bible believing church? I'm like, which Christians don't go to a Bible, but they mean something? Like there's certain dog whistle words that they're not face value words. They're code words that are trying to get at something different. And that one, I think more is like, do you see the Bible the way that I see the Bible? That's what they're asking you. But instead they'll say something hilarious when you're not evangelical, which is, are you Bible believing? Because all Christians have that text as an important text to them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. The better question would be, how do you believe the Bible? Like,
how do you believe that works?
Yeah. How do you believe? Yeah. How do you believe it works? How do you believe it functions? How do you believe it expresses itself? And how do you believe that informs your approach to it?
Would you have called yourself an evangelical, by the way? Like, what would you have called yourself? Because I never would have used the label evangelical. Evangelicals don't call themselves evangelical, right? Did you? Any of you ever?
No. Yeah. I probably would have just referred to myself as Christian.
I feel like that's the way you identify yourself. If you're evangelical, you say, I'm a Christian.
Yeah.
Right?
Or I might have said I'm a born again Christian.
Yeah, if you want to get more specific. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but in an effort to differentiate myself from, whether it was Catholic Christians or
Mormons,
Mormon lines, Mormons or the main lines. Yeah,
and that's when you go, are you Bible believing?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh my gosh, it's what? Yeah.
It's that I think you might hear it in evangelical circles being taught as the Bible is inerrant. It is without error. It is without mistake.
It's such a fascinating talking point, because you're like, inerrant, like the original text is inerrant, and like, oh well, we don't have that. So you mean the copies of the original, they don't match each other? So like, what are you? The whole I feel like the more scholarly you get in this, the more it starts to fall apart. Like, when did the Bible get put together? Which canon? If we're talking about the Bible, whose version of what is canon? Because there's at least 4 different, within Christianity as a whole, there's 4 or 5 or maybe even more opinions of what is included as the canon. And Christians don't all have the same Bible. We have different books that get included, different pieces that get, stuff that gets dropped. And like, when did this get put together? We think of the Bible as a book, but the printing press didn't exist. Like, the Bible was not having this book that's your focus was not the way Christianity was passed down, practiced for hundreds and hundreds of years. Most of Christianity, it wasn't done that way.
No.
And then now, like for evangelicals, it's that book, and it's the canon they consider canon. And the word inerrant doesn't have the thought process of even those, like, I didn't know growing up, who decided what was canon? How did this get formed? How many years after these books were just floating around did they decide to get together and make a decision? Who was included in that decision? Who wasn't included in that? Why?
Yeah.
None of those are part of when you're going, this Bible is inerrant, and all of the big statements that get attached to it. Yeah. It's
none of that ever came up. Never had these conversations. Like, you just never even
thought to
just
ask
never
of
thought
it.
about it. Yeah.
Right.
I don't know.
Right.
Like, I mean, it seems crazy now, but, and I think also you're just so busy just doing everything else. Like you're just so worried about, again, the afterlife, right? And the spiritual battles, and like every little thing has so much significance. You're just so focused on so much other stuff. You can't even stop to think about just the basics of, where did this book come from? Who put this together? Like, you just don't. God did it.
God did it.
And here it is.
Right.
We got it. God did it. We have
Everyone
it.
that I know believes it. No further questions. Like, no
when
notes,
I
no
stumble
questions.
across something confusing, I ask my pastor, and he's going to explain it through his lens, and I'm going to assume he knows God good, and he's going to set me straight on
Right. And
something
also maybe it's not for me to know. You know, God uses the foolish things of the world to confound the wise, and his ways are higher than mine. And, you know.
Wow.
Right.
The ways that we employed cognitive dissonance. I think we're going to get into a lot of this when we get into how evangelicalism is a cult. Oh, you made me think, though, of when you talked about, Janice, being busy with all these things occupying our mind. I know before we hit record, I was reading a Rolling Stone article that the title of it was, oh, man, let me see if I can pull that up fast. It said, the title of it is...
I've got it.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
An evangelical childhood is a total mindfuck. New memoir recounts the anxiety and thrills of growing up as a conservative Christian. And I just love that. It's a catchy title. An evangelical childhood is a total mindfuck. And I think we were all like, yeah. And he talks about needing therapy afterwards, but that how grand of a thing it was to be part of such a big story, and for everything to be a cosmic battle, and everything you do has so much significance, and that came with a ton of anxiety for him, and we were all agreeing, yes, all the fear and anxiety that came with that, but like we felt important, right? Like we felt like we were on that winning team that was
on
like
the right side and on the
right side.
Yeah.
cusp of history, like all the time.
We have the Spirit of God living in us. We've crossed over from death to life. You know, the darkness is not a part of our vision anymore, like it is for everyone else who's not evangelical. The road is narrow. That's another belief, right? Like the road is narrow and few find it. So you're a part of the minority and you're proud of it. And you don't look at the fact that you're in a small, narrow segment and go, oh, maybe I should ask questions about, why everyone else thinks differently. It's like, no, the Bible said the road is narrow and few will find this path. So like, that's even more special of me because I'm on the narrow road. Like that's a big piece of the,
Yep.
Oh, man. So we all of us, different churches, these are all familiar to all of us.
Yeah. Just to clarify, for anyone who's listening and is interested, we'll put the link to that interview.
The Rolling Stones?
Yeah, it was the one in Rolling Stone, but it was an interview with Charles Marsh, whose book recently came out. I think it came out this week, and the book is called Evangelical Anxiety, which is essentially what we all grew up with. whether we knew it or not, that is the life we lived. I mean, God, like I was constantly worried about, sin, like what sinful, and I remember being taught, take every thought captive for Christ.
Every thought captive.
And
we were having a conversation with one of our friends who's autistic, and they take people who have autism take things very literally. Like it's not, like she was explaining to us when she reads time, she doesn't go like 8:40. She does now because she's adjusting to how neurotypical people talk. But like to her, if it's 8:37, it's 8:37. It's not 8:40. Or it's 8:39. It's still 8:39, not 8:40. So like take every thought captive really meant take like the anxiety I had was just that was a general thing. Like I took that as a do your best to overall like aim for this. This is the ballpark. Like kind of like the time, round it to the nearest and just try and aim for that. But like she was talking about the constant, like whatever anxiety I felt, she's talking about as an autistic person, how much more stressful that was. The idea of taking every single, like you can't live or breathe without having to be analyzing every single thought. That's intense.
Yeah.
Or whatever you do, work at it with all your heart. You're working for the Lord and not for man. Every single moment, every single thing you do has to be working for the Lord with every fiber of your being. Like it's an intense.
God demands excellence. So the excellence team had to be, keep those toilets spick and span.
Hillsong reference. These two are smiling. The excellence team was a toilet cleaning team at Hillsong, correct? Yes.
Yep.
Wow. Okay. All right. I had a thought. I was wondering because, for people who are listening who are maybe evangelical or they grew up evangelical and maybe they're rethinking things, I was wondering if we were able to, because right now we look back and it's like, yeah, this is not where we're at. And it's sort of a bit trippy almost to put ourselves there. But, if someone would have asked us when we, like, if you can go back to where you really considered yourself, you wouldn't use the term evangelical, but you're a Christian, you're following Jesus. And somebody said to you, no, but like you're in a cult. I know we could have said it doesn't matter or, but let's say it was somebody who you were close enough to where they were sincerely asking you to explain. Can you imagine where you were at that moment to think of how you would have responded to someone to try and help them if they were sincere and you really wanted them to get where you were coming from? How would you have explained that, no, it's not a cult because what would be or how did you even answer that to yourself in your own mind? What made it not a cult to you?
I think for me, I don't know that I would have really gone too far down, like trying to, because I don't think I was ever approached with, you're in a cult, which is surprising because looking back, even when I was in like a mainstream evangelical church, I look back on my time in fundamentalism, I'm like, oh my God, that was a cult. But I probably would have deflected and pointed at other groups and said, well, we don't do that, therefore we're not a cult. So like we don't make people drink Kool-Aid, or we don't have somebody like David Koresh who's going to bring us all out to a compound. We don't have those markers. And the other thing too for me was that I believed cults to be things, groups that didn't believe the right things about
Same.
God.
Yeah. It was like it wasn't behavior. It was like your doctrine's off. So if you're Mormon or Jehovah's Witness, you're in a cult.
Yeah. To my group, my church growing up, Catholics were
a cult.
Yeah.
Mine was a little iffy. Probably my Italian Pentecostal group, because a lot of them had Catholic relatives, were more likely to call it a cult. And then when I got into more of my brother's church, it was they wouldn't have called Catholics cults. Maybe misguided Christians is how they would have put it.
Yeah.
What about you, Janice? How did you define cults? What was your reference point for what a cult was?
I mean, yeah, a cult is probably almost exactly the same as Nate. Like I too would have deflected and been like, no, it's not, because here's the things we don't do. No, we only believe the Bible. So we're not Jehovah's Witnesses. We're not the Mormons with their Book of Mormon. Like, no, we just stick to the Bible.
We don't have all these weird
no
traditions.
No one ever, when I was growing up, no one ever said I was in a cult. So that wasn't even a conversation.
When you looked at what was a cult outside of your own faith, like when you knew what a cult was for other groups, what did you think that was, or what did you define?
I mean, so we knew it was the Jehovah's Witnesses. Okay. It was the Mormons. It was anybody who starts anything not based on the Bible or proclaiming themselves to be the new leader, right? The new Jesus or whatever, or to have, someone who has some new revelation about something. You're like, oh, that's a cult. And then like once I was in Hillsong and that was just kind of a word floating around, like I just never took it seriously. And it was also just, oh no, like you don't get it. And you're not supposed to get it, honestly. Like you're outside of it and you don't know. And also like I've never had like a huge reaction to the word cult, because I mean you have things like, oh, this movie has a cult following, or right. This, so for me it doesn't necessarily have a negative connotation. Mm-hmm. Like me and my friends, we might be a little cult, right? Like it could also be fun.
It was used in a sort of broader term in your mind too, not necessarily something totally scary or
right. So I would have never. This is not an argument I would have ever had any need to have. Like, first of all, if you're close enough to me to be having the serious conversation, you're probably in the cult too. So we're not talking about it. And if you're coming at me from the outside, You're outside of it.
You don't get it.
You don't get it.
Yeah.
You don't get it.
I liked your point about, cult could be even, just cult following or stuff. And I think, as we get into this topic, and we'll take the time to define it and get more in specific detail. But I think it's important for people to realize, like, cults can be, like, you can have a yoga cult, or you can have, like, lots of, it's not just a religious thing. It can be found in all kinds of ways of doing life where, and I think Kayla Felton from the Reclamation Collective, she's taken some time. I think when we did our one on spirituality, on reclaiming spirituality, she talked about that and how it's not just it's not unique to religion, cult behavior, abusive. I think she's talking more about spiritual abuse,
Abusive behavior.
but
Yeah.
cult behavior is similar to that. It's abusive behaviors. We'll get into how cult and abuse go together and what that looks like. But it's found outside of spiritual circles. It's found outside of evangelicalism. I know to answer that question from my own perspective, I loved studying about cults when I was little. I think sometimes you're fascinated by topics and you don't realize it applies to you, and you haven't made that a connection yet.
Yep.
So you're looking at all the other ones and you're like analyzing it.
Ask
and
me about Scientology. Yeah. Tell you all about it.
And you don't realize how close it resembles your own thing. So I would have definitely been like, yes, it's doctrine and all that, but I would have looked at things like shunning people as a cult thing. Like, I'd be like, oh, and I didn't grow up in fundamentalism. So in mainstream evangelicalism, you're not allowed talking to them anymore once they leave your group. Like, I'd heard stories about in Jehovah's Witness or Mormonism, and I was like, oh, it's very culty. They literally, you have to cut off family members, or you're not allowed. So, like, when I would hear about fundamentalism, I'm like, wow, that's very culty, because, they literally will not associate with you if you have the wrong beliefs, but they won't associate with you if you talk to someone who talks to someone who has the wrong beliefs. Like, they had degrees of separation doctrine, which was like so culty in my head. I was like, wow, this is an intense thing. And so I was like, oh, the fundamentalists, they've got it all wrong. But
Hey.
but like, I think of it now and I'm like, no, we didn't directly teach to shun people, but ask me how many people within my church that I spent 20 years, almost, 2 decades investing in, how many of them still talk to me? Ask me how many people who I thought were close to me still keep up with me. Now, is that on my end too? Do I reach out to them? No, I don't necessarily either. But you don't even have to have, let's say, a shun doctrine to create that sort of in and out group vibe. And one of the reasons I don't reach out is because when you're in those groups, so much of your thought process revolves around a very specific way of looking at it that sometimes it's almost hard to find those common ground points once your life is no longer revolving around that. Like, once it's expanded beyond that, and that's not what everything is about, I remember having conversation about movie and TV with people who aren't Christians and feeling like, this is really shallow conversation. This is like how I thought of it. I was like, I want to get into the meaty stuff because that's what's important. And everything was about God and life and death. And that was what I had to wait for, where I can plug it in, where I can see an opportunity to give a reason for the hope that I have. I mean, as evangelicals, we knew all the verses that were telling us to always be prepared to give an answer and to share our faith. Memorize the Great Commission. I'm sure all of us could go through these things and we'd remember them. But like, yeah, it was intense. And I definitely find the in-group, out-group stuff, even if it wasn't fundamentalism, just evangelicalism in general, creates that dynamic of the, when you're in or out of it So that was interesting.
Yeah.
I just want to do that exercise of how we would have responded. I think for me, to be like, well, we didn't shun people. We don't tell you, it's funny because like I could say things and now like I'm questioning it, right? Like the shunning, but yet like we don't tell you how to dress. But do we though? Like, no, we didn't have a uniform. No, they didn't measure like fundamentalist churches will measure like how many inches here or there. We didn't do that. But there was certainly a lot of shame and stigma around if you accidentally ended up taking it too far. And the ambiguousness made that even more common, just happen because everybody had different opinions. I almost feel like the structure of fundamentalism probably at least provides a guideline for people to know how to function within, the standards. Whereas I feel like evangelicalism, it could be from one preacher to the next. It could vary. And then, you cross the wrong person with the wrong belief system. And now you're going to hear about how you're dressed immodestly and how you're causing a brother in Christ to stumble. And purity culture is another big, huge piece of evangelicalism. Huge piece of evangelicalism.
Yeah.
is the whole don't have sex and what are you wearing, and is there any sexual thoughts popping in your head, and we need to govern your thought life and your relationships very micromanagingly.
Yeah.
Oh, we're gonna get. I feel like I'm jumping ahead, Nate. Right? Like we had a little comb through. Right? Like we wanted to do a more, I guess, analysis of what a cult is based on. Go for it, Nate. You jump in.
Yeah. So I think one way that that has helped me kind of frame all of my experiences, because I mean, and I know I talk about it often on the podcast, but I do have like a plethora of experiences within various branches of evangelical Christianity. And so the reason that I would say, I guess, to answer the question, why I think evangelical Christianity in particular is a cult, spoiler alert for those, who are wondering, I do think that evangelical Christianity is a cult. Oh, did I startle you, Janice? This might not be the podcast for you then.
She's like, I'm out. Bye.
Never coming back.
I think for me, I couldn't come to that conclusion. I would have said, when I was in my mainstream evangelicalism days, I would have said that fundamentalism for sure was a cult and that I escaped from that cult. But I would never have looked at evangelical Christianity overall as a cult. And again, like we're using words that we associate, or I'm using words that I associate with that branch of Christianity now that back then I wouldn't have associated. I would have been familiar with the term evangelical, and I might have said, okay, that does describe me, but that's not how I would describe myself. But looking back, anyway, all of that to say, what helped me was Stephen Hassan's bite model of authoritarian control, which we'll put a link to this in the show notes, because this is I think
this is
very
what we wanted to go
stuff.
through, because I think it's helpful for anyone, whether you're in evangelicalism or in something else that you could be involved in that could be a cult. Like this book wasn't written for evangelicals.
Mm-hmm.
This wasn't written for evangelicals. This was just written as an analysis of cult behavior. And so we just want to take the time. We were excited about doing this podcast episode specifically because we wanted to take the time to go like, hey, this book is not written for us or for evangelicals. But it gives you a grid for like filtering what is, So what I like about it, and I'm like spoiler alert, I guess a bit, but like it focuses on actions and behaviors rather than what I was taught, which was doctrines and beliefs and having the right beliefs. Mm-hmm. Not that beliefs don't factor into this, but we'll get to that. Right. It gives more of a grid for what is, how come even things that are not spiritual can be considered cults by taking you through sort of like a model and a structure to analyze different components of what you're involved in. So we thought this would be a fun exercise to like take each of our backgrounds in our various denominations of where we were spread out amongst evangelicalism and see, what experiences we had that fell into these categories when we comb through them. So that's what we setting you guys up to. We did our long preamble, but this is where we're going.
Yeah.
If you hung on this long.
So Stephen Hassan's BITE model of authoritarian control. The reason it's called a BITE model is it's an acronym for behavior control, information control, thought control, and emotional control. Since this conversation went on for a while, we took Janice's suggestion and split it into a few parts. Stay tuned for an upcoming episode where we'll continue this discussion and start looking into how the various forms of evangelicalism exert control over their followers. Thank you so much for listening. Be sure to swing by fullmutuality.com to find our social media handles, links to the apps you can subscribe to us on, and contact info so you can get in touch with us. See you next time on the Full Mutuality Podcast.